Good afternoon. It's Dan Kurz, DK Analytics from Bonita Springs, Florida. It is high noon here on a sunny day on October 28th, 2020. I'm chiming back in with a video. I've called it an appeal to you and like-minded friends of yours. But before I delve into that, let me get to some valuation metrics, starting with the all-important US dollar value relative to other currencies, the DXY or the Dixie index. The dollar stood at 93.62, so it's bottomed out for now. The Fed's balance sheet stood at $7.2 trillion, up marginally before what I think is going to be a huge levitation of it. The US 10-year stood at 0.75%, that is the yield. The S&P 500 still in bubble land at 33.91, albeit under a bit of pressure from reduced coronavirus case fears, which are much divorced from death resulting from the virus, but I'll get into that. And that's an old saw of mine, as you know. Oil stood at $37.69 per blue barrel, caught in a downdraft also to renewed lockdowns, including in Germany and elsewhere due to coronavirus fears. Gold and silver, both of them have remained in corrective phases and are currently also heading further south. Gold at $18.81, $1,881 per troy ounce, and silver at $23.59 per troy ounce. But let me get to my appeal. We are 6 days away from the US November 3rd election. Lots of voting is already taking place. Please vote. Please bring a friend or two that can be convinced to vote for liberty. By the way, I'm taking my daughter Sarah later today and voting early. Both of us are convinced that we have no choice but to vote elephant or Republican or RINO up and down the line. It's a slim chance to sustainably open back up and to have life return to normal or to lock it down like never before beyond the coronavirus dictons. It's Trump versus Biden, or actually it's Trump versus Harris. It's the Republicans and the RINOs versus the power-drunk Democrats at the national, state, and local/municipal or county levels. It's saving what's left of freedom instead of accelerating our descent into full-fledged tyranny, which budding mobocracy tendencies will only worsen. As you consider my appeal, please forget the drones, the indoctrinated Kool-Aid drinkers. For me, sadly and probably indicatively, it's forget over half of my family because we could just as well be speaking different languages. You can probably relate. It's that serious, and that's why it's so important that as many of us vote for liberty and for national sovereignty versus selling out to the globalist Biden crime family and its ilk. And to have at least a slim chance to put out of work, to throw out of work, the very elected Marxist Democratic types that have appointed or helped appoint so many extremely crooked cabinet officials and bureaucrats. The likes of Comey, Clapper, Brennan, Lynch, Holder, and McCabe, to name but a few. Are you listening, Mr. Epstein Barr? Look, I've been a reluctant supporter of Trump, primarily because he is a deficitary spendthrift, a big government guy, a proponent of money printing and yield deprivation, and he's into managing trade with an even bigger bureaucracy, all of which are highly corrosive for freedom, free market capitalism, and societal stability and well-being. In fact, I've written numerous pieces as to why, which were widely recirculated online, including Trump's State of the Union, U.S. greatness financed by more debt, ? And Trump, the real U.S. worker deal, and Hooverism revisited, ? I'll provide the links to those posts in the content section of this video. I have also warned time and time again of our impending financial, economic, and societal collapse, and how the coronavirus lockdown policy would be much, much worse than the disease itself, because it wouldn't just be the straw that broke the economies and societies back, but the bridge that fell on both of them. That falling bridge is seeing debt expanding in the trillions of dollars at virtually every level within months. It's seeing states and municipalities about to go broke, thanks not only to unpayable pension commitments, but to 40% lockdown triggered implosions of their tax base. Very much including in that implosion of their tax base, small businesses going bust, which constitute roughly 50% of the economy or output. And we have major industries levered up with stock buying debt that are about to go insolvent thanks to the bureaucrats eviscerating their business's top line. For graphic flavor, recall Delta's 94% and now 84% plus top line shrinkage in Q1 and Q2 of this year, respectively. And think about the fact that the erstwhile financially responsible party, the RINOs, are tossing out an unimaginable Stage 2 stimulus round offer of $1.8 trillion before coming to the rescue of bankrupt states and insolvent public sector pension funds sometime after the election. In stark contrast to that $1.8 trillion stimulus offer by the RINOs, recall that it took the U.S. federal government 180 years to run up $2 trillion in debt, as we go full tilt into absolute fiscal and monetary insanity, with states, municipalities, and K Street companies, in other words, the people with pull, screaming for money printing buyouts, lest even more jobs are lost and pension benefits can't be paid in coronavirus policy lockdown land. In short, a financial, currency, economic, and possibly societal breakdown is ever closer to rearing its ugly head, whoever wins on November 3rd, or whenever it's ultimately decided. Despite all that, the current election is a binary choice between not fully losing freedom, with some clawback hope on the one hand, and condemning Main Street to a back in the USSR type of outcome on the other hand. Under a Kamala Harris administration, it would happen quickly, as the left is in a tremendous rush to finally end resistance to totalitarian integration by quaint and obsolete concepts such as individual freedom and inalienable rights as codified by the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. In my opinion, this is the most important election since Abraham Lincoln ran for president in 1860 on the Emancipation of Slaves Proclamation, or the Declaration of Independence revisited. Voting for Donald Trump and Mike Pence, and any Republican, RINOs included, running against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and any other Democrat running is, in my mind, akin to voting for Republican Lincoln over Southern Democrat Breckinridge, or for liberty over tyranny/slavery. Set aside is my message, just for this election, set aside just for this election, the increasingly spendthrift, broke, and fascistic U.S. government that is tilted badly against Main Street and does the business of K Street and Wall Street because we've lost sound money. Why set it aside? Because clearly the only remote chance we have of reinstituting constitutional government will depend on the elected officials running the White House, the Senate, and the House, and on the president's and the Senate's ability to continue to tilt judgeships back towards those with fidelity to the Constitution instead of judges newly elected wanting to legislate in a very progressive democratic sense from the bench. That is what interventionist politicians couldn't force on the nation or onto states. So-called activist judges will, usurping both federalism and the legislative function in the process, kissing separation of powers goodbye while further underpinning governmental tyranny. In other words, even more legislating from the bench will only serve to further entrench an unrepresentative, typically tenured federal bureaucracy, the deep state, if you will, which, together with the courts, effectively rules the country and makes its laws, not the legislative branch. Recall, if you will, that it costs companies something like $1.9 trillion a year to comply just with U.S. federal regulations, or about a tenth of GDP. Consider the drag on Main Street investment and expansion and hiring, even as crony redistributionism and compliance lawsuits keep on humming. Is it any wonder that there are over 2 million federal bureaucrats, and the bigger the government gets, the more bloated they get and their payrolls? Is it any wonder that the richest counties in America are clustered around redistributionist Washington, D.C., with nary an exception? What's left of freedom in the U.S., and I would argue in the West, hangs in the balance. For if the Davos globalist plutocratic ruling class, of which the Paris Accord Democrats and the Fed are chartered members, can put the last nail in the coffin of national sovereignty, the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, which comprise mankind's ultimate codification of individual liberty and inalienable rights, then the citadel of individual freedom will cease to exist, and so will codified freedom itself. The glide path for global communism or a return to serfdom will finally have been achieved at long last. The 2020 election is about individual liberty, breathing free, and individual property rights versus iron-fisted tyranny, censorship, lockdowns, and masks. It is a choice between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Why? Because if, God forbid, Biden legitimately wins, or more likely, manages to cheat his way to victory via voter fraud, then Biden will soon be pushed aside either by his stout mental degeneration or by plotting Democrats themselves chomping at the bit to finally turn America into a full-blown dictatorship. That de facto communist manifesto, also known as the Democratic Party platform, would be radical demagogue Kamala Harris's execution dream, together with the Marxists and racists that have taken over the Democratic Party, bent on balkanization and destruction. If you think that I've had one drink too many, or that I'm foaming at the mouth, consider what would happen on the heels of a Biden-Harris win based on their party's de facto communist manifesto, which I'll provide a link to in the comments section of this video. A manifesto that seeks massive tax increases, hugely increased regulations, the closure of private schools for competition to the incompetent public schools, open borders, amnesty with full social benefits without any pay-ins, the termination of private health care, the destruction of leveraged economic output made possible only by fossil fuels, and universal basic income financed by yet more deficits underwritten by yet more money printing, to name a few of their wealth of nations and freedom killers. It would finish off what remains in terms of the US Constitution, or more appropriately, the minuscule fidelity to it. It would eviscerate what remains of individual liberty and property right protections. For democratic flavor of even more despotic coming attractions, should Trump and the Republicans be unable to hold the presidency and the Senate, consider what has been and what is taking place, and what would be doubled down on if the Democrats take back the presidency and the Senate. Consider California Governor Gruesome Newsom's Thanksgiving Day guidelines insanity that requires California families to celebrate outside, not indoors, to avoid singing and shouting, to wear masks when not eating, to remain 6 feet apart while eating, and to spend only 2 hours together before disbanding. Want this at the national level? This is what Sleepy Joe and left of Bernie Kamala Harris want, and they've even said so in so many words. Consider lots of landlords that have been effectively forced by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, to accept the fact that their tenants don't have to pay rent that have been thrown out of work by the CDC's lockdown policies. And they don't need to pay rent, those tenants, to their landlords, even as those landlords need to continue to pay interest on the mortgages that they have outstanding, more often than not, which is threatening to force them into bankruptcy. Now, this is quite the Fifth Amendment Takings Clause violation, an amendment which in essence protects private businesses against government seizures or shutdowns. Want this sustained with Harris, or do you want Trump to finally fire deep state Fauci and rein in and refocus this out-of-control agency, which isn't even supposed to be in the legislative business, in a more holistic direction, in a favorable cost-benefit direction? Consider that people in blue states often still can't go to church or worship in their synagogues or open up their businesses to a degree that would slash the rate of unsustainable cash burn. These dictatorial lockdowns are supposed to reduce the spread of the coronavirus. Yet, BLM and Antifa can engage in violent protests that destroys property, creates fear, and triggers an economic collapse across much of urban America, turning broad swaths of New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, and LA into ghost towns in conjunction with the lockdown provisions, or perhaps more accurately, make them look as if the neutron bomb had been dropped. You cannot have a sustainable economic recovery if 60% of Americans live in urban areas that are locked down or under mob threat. Yet Biden/Harris want to double down on lockdowns and want to defund the police. Consider that masks have to be worn virtually everywhere, despite study after study proving their lacking efficacy. I will provide a link here too, in terms of preventing tiny coronavirus particles from spreading beyond the wearer's face while causing oxygen starvation, CO2 inhalation, and promoting a facial greenhouse of moisture and warmth in which germs and bacteria can multiply and potentially make the wearer sick. In a nutshell, this fear-based, virtue signaling inducing, ineffective mask tyranny is, despite increasing evidence of drowsiness, depression, and potentially long-lasting brain damage that sustained oxygen deprivation associated with prolonged daily mask use can cause. I intend to provide a link or links on these matters before the year is out, beyond what I already have, hopefully in November. Or consider the incredible censorship being imposed on opposing views to the democratic narrative by social media giants. So censorship being imposed on those that have views that oppose the Democratic Party narrative by none other than the social media giants we know well, all powerful Google, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter on the one hand, and the mainstream media, Pravda press, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and CBS on the other hand. These are the same outfits that gladly, endlessly aired the phony Trump Russian collusion hoax despite not having a shred of evidence, as we all know. Yet, these are the same outfits that are now concerned that even a highly incriminating Hunter Biden laptop or a leading Democratic businessman that's devoted to Democratic Party by the name of Bobulinski spilling his beans about rampant Biden family abuse of power, corruption, thuggery, and bribes in terms of extensively monetizing Joe Biden's office overseas via or through his son. Or that is, his son got paid because he opened up his dad's influence inside of the Obama administration. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars here flowing into the Biden family. Yet these mainstream media and tech giant outfits are concerned that the increasing preponderance of evidence on all the Biden family abuse, corruption, thuggery, and bribes taken, they're concerned that the evidence isn't flimsy enough or isn't appropriate enough to even air this to viewers to have them determine or make up their own minds. That's the censorship. Biden family cronyism is the worst kind, for not only does it favor the politically connected, but it constitutes a betrayal of one's country, its security, and its business interests. Talk about the cobbler's shoes being ill-worn. Do we want a president beholden to China and Russia or to America? If you want more censorship, corruption, and globalism over Americanism, vote Democratic. And the Democrats will control not only the profit press, Hollywood, universities, public schools, the bureaucracy, and the courts, but the elected branches of the federal government. Here too, I will provide you with some juicy links if you're interested in having a closer look. And one is a powerful but restrained and measured 3-minute depiction of the Biden crime family by none other than the man that the Democrats have been baselessly trying to impeach for over 3.5 years. Also consider censorship by the press of sharply declining death tolls related to the coronavirus. Yet many small businesses, from barbershops to cinemas to restaurants to fitness studios to convention centers in blue states, remained locked down or unable to realize the kind of capacity utilization that gives them the chance of reaching break even, remaining solvent, and perhaps even breaking into the black. In other words, government mandated bankruptcy for millions of family businesses is boosted through grotesque misrepresentation of the coronavirus threat for the vast majority of the population, where over 99.5% of all those people that contract the virus between the age of 1 day and 69 years of age survive and thrive. 99.5%. And many of those that contracted the virus, they didn't even know they had it. Yet they put it down and thus helped to drive herd immunity higher and the virus's ability to spread lower. If you want to sustain and expand such freedom and business curdling censorship and the associated lockdowns, turn over the White House and the Senate to the Democrats, and America will become one-party California toast from coast to coast. If you want to offset despotic, anti-constitutional lockdowns of business, travel, and socializing, and then bail out various constituencies bludgeoned by the coronacrats' business and social interaction asphyxiation, vote Democratic. If you want record government deficits, even bigger ones, papered over with even more money printing that goes mainly to cronies, then vote Democratic. If you want an even more severe economic collapse, accompanied by much higher rates of inflation, then vote Democratic. If you want an increasingly destabilized and impoverished societies where hospitals, police, and firemen don't pick up 9/11 calls, and even more pensions go insolvent, vote Democratic. If you want to become a ward of the state, vote for Dems, because this is what they are after, you becoming a ward of the state. If dictators want to suppress joy, intimacy, natural human interaction, and humans frolicking in nature and taking in the sun's brightening and healing rays, they will not only suppress happiness and normalcy and positive expectations, but they will, and they are, wreaking havoc with people's desire to live, witness the exploding suicide rates, with their immune systems, and with economic vitality. Talk about a triple whammy of coronavirus policy destructiveness. If this is the kind of leaders you want, well then vote Democratic, because such disasters are the historical offspring of socialism, of unnatural behavior, and the bastardization of natural incentives to produce, to invest, to save. It's what happens when you go against human nature. In a nutshell, all that also happens to be despotic and against the intent of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which, as you know, protect freedom of speech, freedom to peaceably assemble, due process rights, and property rights, and any rights that are natural but haven't been documented. Call it the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence Revisited, which Mark Levin rightly observes. This kind of despotic traction has been extensively displayed and has extensively played out in California, where none other than Kamala Harris is from. It's what will happen if Kamala Harris and the Marxist Democrats take over the White House and win control of the Senate, and then pack the Supreme Court disband the filibuster rule in the Senate, and try to turn two leftist jurisdictions, DC and Puerto Rico, into states that will give them a permanent Democratic majority in the Senate, or one-party government in the upper chamber of Congress. Once again, expect this to happen with blazing speed if Democrats win, as the fear-mongering, Main Street impoverishing coronacrats will be eager to double down on the COVIDocracy that is threatening to engulf the whole world. Despite the successes of We Remained Open South Dakota, with under 300 coronavirus deaths, or 0.3% of that state's population, and despite a similar story having played out in Sweden. Can't let facts that threaten to disarm a despotic, ruinous coronavirus policy imposed by power-drunk authorities get in the way. Right, Kamala? And this policy is but a stepping stone to even more tyranny elsewhere. That's the big message. And that is my appeal. And the reasons for it to vote Republican up and down the line, we have no choice. 6 short days away from the US election on today, October 28th, 2020. I say this from sunny sky, Lee County, Florida, where we are benefiting substantially from a state rapidly opening back up and from blue state and urban blue state flight. Leading beach location restaurants and country clubs are seeing record food and drink revenues. Flights to the local airport have been breaking records, and local construction is busier than any time in recent history. If only the public schools would return to sanity and education over unhealthy mask diktats and widespread indoctrination, starting with CNN being piped in each and every day. But that's another story that I will be following up on, given my efforts via our family doctor to unmask my 12th grade daughter at school, an eminently reasonable and respectful request based on facts, science, and the optimal health of students who virtually never succumb to the virus and are very poor spreaders. And even if they did succumb, the masks are useless, sad, oxygen starvation, sick-making jokes. Unfortunately, I'm dealing with a bureaucracy heavily invested in masking up at any and all cost. Facts be damned, students' health be damned, and they are extremely unlikely to be ready to lose face at virtually any and all cost, which would open the door to other students also wanting to breathe free. Please stay tuned and consider joining me in my effort, if anywhere you're at in the US or any place else where this is happening, and my effort to try to unmask our kids at Lee County Public Schools, if you are so inclined and think in similar terms. My post and the associated link on this should be available prior to year's end, and perhaps as early as November, if things go expected and according to plan. That's it from here. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got something out of this, and please remember my hopefully well-founded appeal. Bye-bye.